Okay, welcome, Natalie and Linda and Claudia and Chris and Michelle, Alexandra and Lizbeth, Stephanie, and a phone number. Can't see who you are, but welcome. This is going to be very different than the orientation, by the way. This is what the webinars are really going to be about, and they're about learning statistics. And we didn't do any orientation. So just to let you know what you're getting into today is I'm going to be discussing highlights of chapter 1 and 2. An hour is not long enough to do every detail, and you probably you may not have the perseverance to go through every detail because it would take hours and hours and hours. So what I do is I try and give you highlights, and this is a component of the learning in the class. But there's also reading the chapter. There's also watching the long YouTube videos that I have posted and the discussion forum. So there's a whole lot more to this class than just this. So don't assume that if you watch the webinar that you've got the entire week's material. So this is a piece. And I'll do some of the highlights. I'll show you some of the things you need to see. I like to bring in current events if I can, or new stuff, because where the long videos, I want them, they take like 12 hours to produce. So they need to last for years. But this doesn't, because I do this every quarter. So that's the plan today, is to go through chapter 1 and 2. And chapter 1 and 2 is, they're actually now done in high school. But I'm not sure because I don't see y'all, but my guess is that most of you were not in high school during the Common Core. I'm not sure if any of you were. But if you were at high school during the Common Core, they now do this. It's part of the math curriculum from eighth grade until 12th grade. But because you're not 17 years old, okay, or maybe you are, I don't have your ages, but I definitely know a couple of you aren't. You're not 17 years old, you didn't get it in high school, but you still got some of the stuff. So I'm gonna it's gonna be all terminology. It's not gonna look much like a math class, especially chapter 1, because it's just a lot of language. So I want to do it by example. I think that's kind of how I like to set these webinars, is I give you examples. Sometimes I have stock examples. Today I have a more of a current event example. So I want to share my screen. Let me do that. That one. Let me go here, and let me also go to the chat to make sure I can read anyone's chat questions. There it is. Okay, no one has a chat. But if you have a question, you can ask, or you can chat it in the chat box. I have one eye on this screen and one eye on this screen. I got a 2-screen computer. So, so what this is, of course, you're not seeing anything yet. There we go. This is our local news. Our local news, and this is what I like about teaching this class so much, is I can go to the local news or the national news, and I can find something of what we're doing in this class pretty much every week. That's not true of other classes. So I thought I'd scroll down a little bit. This is the Tahoe Daily Tribune. I know not all of you from Tahoe, but you know what local news looks like. And hopefully you can see this, right? Okay. So there's a poll. So there's a poll that our news channel does to find out what people in our community feel. Okay, so the poll is, what do you think of the South Lake Tahoe City Council's decision to temporarily ban recreational marijuana businesses? Okay, so you have 3 choices. Smart move, the city needs more time to create regulations. Bad move, the city had plenty of time to get in front of this. And the third is, city council should ban all recreational marijuana businesses permanently. Okay, so we'll call that A, B, and C. Let's see, I want you to vote, and then we're going to vote. So put in your chat box, A, B, or C, what you think. And then I'm going to vote whatever the group thinks. Whether you're from Tahoe or not, you guys know, hopefully, about recreational marijuana. It's a California thing. Yeah, A, B, B. Any others? Another few seconds. A, Aha, it looks like the A's are winning. Okay, so the A's are winning. So I'm gonna
push enter.
Huh?
Do I push enter after I type it, or
Yeah.
is it okay.
Yeah, you gotta hit enter after you type it.
Okay, sorry.
All right. Nobody said C. So A, B, B, A. So more A's and B's. I'm gonna vote A. Smart move. The city needs more time to create regulations. And I'm gonna vote. I already voted because I practiced this once. So I need to go back. I need to go forward. Won't let me vote twice. That's new. They didn't used to do that. Okay, but what I can do is I can view results. So we'll see the results of this. So most people that answered this question said bad move. Okay. The interesting thing is the fewest number of people said smart move. And by the way, I have a little influence. One of my good friends is the mayor, and I know most of the rest of the city council also. So maybe I'll tell you the two truths and untruth. Any guess on one of the truths? I don't know if you remember mine.
That you ran for office.
I was a politician for 9 years. So there's a reason why I know the whole city council, because I wasn't on the city council. I was on the school board and in charge. Actually, I was the president for the entire county at one point, just a year and a half ago. So I'm not anymore. I decided not to run for 9 years is a long time. So I decided to go just do teaching. So I know these people, and so I know intimately what they do. And I also know that they really don't know statistics that well either. A little scary. But I also know that our president doesn't either. It's very obvious. Whether you like him or not, he is not a statistician. Do you all agree? Okay, that's not his thing. I never heard him talk statistics. So that's too bad, because obviously I believe in looking at statistics and making decisions based on statistics. So now the question I have, we did the vote. So we got 562 votes for this one, 193 for the second one, and 174 for this one. Okay, so is that everyone? Is that everyone in our town? No, we're a small town. We're not that small. We're not that small. Well, you know, we're somewhere around 20,000 people. It fluctuates year to year. And if you include anyone who is a tourist here, because that might be important to them, who might also vote, so all the potential voters, then we're talking maybe 2 million. We get a lot of tourists. So the question is, the population is all the people who care about South Lake Tahoe. Let's call it that. And that's a couple million people. And why didn't they just get everyone in the population to answer? Any guesses? Any thoughts?
Not enough outreach.
Not enough outreach. Okay, it's impossible. Even if they had enough outreach, they couldn't do it. Do you think?
Not everybody will vote.
Yeah, not everyone's going to vote. You can't find everybody.
Some people don't care.
Some people don't care. That could be. But the point is, you can't in the real world, and this is real world, is you would like to get an opinion of the entire population so the city council can make a decision for the people, right? Unfortunately, the reality is you can't do that. So the goal is to find out what the population thinks. And the bad news is you can never, ever get your goal perfectly. Kind of sad, isn't it? Okay, so whenever you're doing city things, and national is even harder, you can't get the whole population. So instead what you do is you get a sample. So we're really going to be looking at using a sample, and a sample is a subset of the population. So we're going to use a sample to make inferences about the population. And that is what statistics is all about. That is the whole point of statistics. Because, again, the city council can't get the whole population, but they can look at a sample and say, well, now they know more about the population than they did if they didn't look at a sample. Is that clear? Okay. Here's the problem. is this a good sample? So who answered? Okay, I was one of them. I actually did while I was preparing for this. And a bunch of other people answered. And one of the questions is, do the people who answered this survey, do they represent the population well? Or are they what we call a biased sample? Any thoughts?
It could be.
I think it's a biased sample because not everybody reads the Tribune.
Yeah, I would say two things. One, not everyone reads the Tribune, so you're only getting a certain kind of person. And again, you want to think about how is it biased for this survey. Not for all surveys, but for this survey. So you want to think about the type of person who reads the Tribune, and are they more likely to think it's a bad move, to think it is that they should just ban it permanently, or to think it's a smart move? Are they more likely of one of those three compared to the population as a whole? If they're not, then it's unbiased. Does that make sense? It's biased if they tend to be different than the population for one reason or another. Does that make sense? So for example, you might think, and again, I don't have the perfect answer for this, but you might think that people are more passionate and more angry when they actually click on a survey. And more angry people like the word bad. So it might be that this is biased towards the bad move, because angry people are going to click bad. They're more likely to answer the survey. Does that make sense? Okay, and this is just a possibility. Let me give you another example, and it's one that you all know about, where the survey went wrong. And this happened 16 months ago. So now let's see if you can think in history, not too long ago. What happened 16 months ago when the survey went wrong?
I would say the election.
Yeah, the election. If you looked at the survey in September of 2016, all of the surveys said Hillary Clinton was going to win, and by a landslide, by the way. Not even close. So what happened is there was bias. And the bias was the people that answered those surveys were the same kind of people who are not the ones, or let's say the people that didn't answer the survey are the same kind of people that say, screw off, I'm on my own, I don't want to answer your survey. And they're the same kind of people that tend to vote for Trump. So what happened is the survey results were misleading because they missed a huge group of people, in particular, these Trump supporters. So we had what's called a convenience sample. And this is a convenience sample also, where you just ask people, you don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out who you're asking, and you're going to have bias. So this is a convenience sample, and it's not the best way of going. So now here's the question. Let's suppose you want a survey, and you don't want to do a convenience sampling because you don't want to do something where you're going to only get a certain kind of person, the people that think that it's a bad move because they're angry or whatever. And you want to get a better sample of people. You can't get everyone. There's a couple million people who come to Tahoe every year, and you just don't have the money and the time to do 2 million people, but you might have the time to do, say, 500. So how do you go and identify 500 people? And that is what survey design is all about. And it's tough. It's tough. So let me tell you a few of the ways of doing it. One is you identify types of people that might be a bias because of that type. So for example, millennials are more likely to want marijuana in the town sold, okay? And that, based on every study I've ever seen, that's true, that they're more likely than elderly, okay? And you may or may not believe it, but I've looked at the statistics, and it's definitely true. I've looked at the electoral results also. And so the question is, one of the things you might want to do is you can research and you can see what's the percent of the people who come to Tahoe that are millennials? What are the percent of people who come to Tahoe that are Gen X's? What are the percent that are baby boomers, etc. And you can find that online pretty easily. Okay, that's not that hard. That stuff is researched and done. So then you say, well, I want 500 people, and let's say that 70% of the people who come, let's more like 40% of the people who come to Lake Tahoe are millennials. So you take 40% times 500. I told you this is a math class, and again, you're allowed calculators in this class, but 40% of 500 is 200. You can trust me, or you can do it yourself. So then you survey 200 millennials. Does that make sense? And you find out maybe 15% are Gen Xers. You take 15% of 500. 15% of 500 is 125. Again, you don't have to do it by heart. Is 125? Let's see. Sorry, that's 75. 75. And then you survey 75 Gen Xers. Does that make sense? And then you do that for each of the categories. So you identify what we call the strata. The strata means the groups that you want to look at. So you take the population, you say, well, this group, this group, this group, this group constitutes the whole population. Step one is to identify the strata. Step two is to research and find out the percent of the population that is of each of the groups. And then step three is to multiply the sample size times that percent. And then the final step is to survey to establish those as quotas, and you survey with those quotas. And that's called stratified sampling. I'm not writing all that out. Other times I'll be writing a bunch. Right now I'm doing more talking. You'll see that on the long video. You'll see it in the book. So the written stuff is all there, I promise. Any questions so far? Okay, another way of doing it, because that could get hard. One thing is, then you might want to pick 7 other stratas and make sure you're good with those quotas too. You did by age. You may also want to do it by, say, political affiliation. And we might know what percent of Democrats, what percent of Republicans, and what percent of independents there are in Lake Tahoe. And then you do the same thing with that strata. Does that make sense? Okay, so in your project, if you choose stratified sampling, I'm going to let you just choose one type of strata. That's okay. You could do by age. A gender is another one you could use. Okay, be careful. It's not always 50-50. Okay, it's not always 50-50. For example, if you do college students at this college, it's not 50% male and 50% female. Okay, you used to be more female. Now we're more male. And you'll never guess why. Okay, I challenge you. I doubt any of you guess. About 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we did a complete turnover to more men. And there's a reason, and it won't make you mad. It might make you mad. But if you can think of it, there's a reason. Okay? All right, no one guessed. It's because we actually teach the prison population of Northern California. And there's a lot of men that are prisoners. So all of a sudden we have more men than women because we have all these prisoners. Okay, but the non-prisoners, there's more women than men. So you have to identify your population. Do you want to include the prisoners if you're going to be doing, say, a student study? Well, one thing, good luck trying to survey them. They're in jail. You can't go there. Does that make sense? So already there's going to be inherent biases that you can't get around. Okay, a second way of doing a sampling technique is what's called cluster sampling. So that might be, one of the things you might identify is in this community, we have our locals, people who live in Tahoe. We have our skiers and snowboarders. I think you know who those are. They come up and they go skiing at Heavenly or Sierra or one of our ski resorts. We also have our gamblers. So again, if you don't know Tahoe, I'm just describing what we are. And that's a totally different group than the skiers and snowboarders. Okay, so you identify kind of what you have in the town. So then what you do is you make sure that you go to each of those groups and you survey a cluster in each group. So you might go to one particular chairlift and survey everyone at that chairlift that is in line for 10 or 15 minutes. Does that make sense? And then you might go to the casino and survey everybody at Harrah's blackjack tables on that Saturday evening. And then you might go to our local grocery store and survey everyone at that grocery store that walks in for a period of time. Does that make sense? And one of the things is because you're surveying everyone, you don't have what's called voluntary response bias. And again, that's what sunk the statistics for the presidential campaign, was this voluntary response bias. Because you're serving everyone in line and you're usually giving them a reward to answer the survey. Sometimes money, and if you give people money, they will answer. It's one of the neat things about people. Sometimes it gets very expensive. So there's different ways of doing a cluster sampling to make sure that you're avoiding voluntary response bias, and you're also guaranteeing that you're getting the main groups. Does that make sense? And that's cluster sampling. And that's another sampling technique. Okay, the one sampling technique that is very hard to do, there are situations you can, is called random sampling. So I want to let you know that when you do your project, if you use the word random, worry. Because most likely I'm going to take off points. Because to do a random sample is pretty impossible in most situations. Okay? Random doesn't happen. In fact, they've done studies where they ask people to pick random people, and they found out that they're more likely to pick someone like themselves. It's a psychological thing. I don't know, in this group, do we have anyone in psychology major? I know we have a few in the class.
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know if you studied that. Have you?
Yeah, they've talked about it.
Yeah, so people are more likely, even though if they're really working to get a random group, they're more likely to get a group just like them. Okay, so if you're female, you're more likely to approach females, right? If you're Hispanic, you're more likely to find Hispanics. Does that make sense? If you're older, you're more likely to find older people. Okay, it's just impossible to do random. So the only way to do a random study is to get a list of every single person in the entire population, and then let a computer pick the people, because computers don't have that bias. So you number them, and you ask the computer. You could ask Siri. Siri will do it for you. You say, Siri, give me 500 random numbers between 1 and 2 million, and Siri will do it. And then you got to find those people and ask those people. Does that make sense? You're not going to be able to do that for your project because you can't list all the people. Does that make sense? There are cases where you can do that. Manufacturing businesses, for example. Do we have any business majors in this group? No one?
Yes.
Okay, so when you're in business, if you're making a product, then you actually have the list of all the products that you've made, and you can test a random sample of your products because you can get a computer to pick numbers from that list, and then you can test those particular items on your list. Okay, and that's totally unbiased. You're not allowed to do that for the project because you have to ask people for the project. So random's pretty impossible. Okay, the project involves surveys with people. Okay, any questions on that? Another reason why I use cluster sampling is, let's say you're a biologist and you want to find, let's say you want to find out, I don't know, something random up here, the height of the average pine tree in Tahoe. Might be interesting. Okay, well, how are you going to decide which pine trees to measure? You see that? So cluster sampling is a good way. Is you figure out what are the main ecosystems in the area. You pick an acre for each ecosystem, and then you measure all the trees in that 1 acre. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, another sampling technique that could be used is what's called systematic. Let me get a little water. So let's suppose you work for this college, okay, or whatever college you're at, but you're all at this college because you're in my class. And you want to get a sample of students. So one way of doing that is you could say, well, we're going to have, let's say, 1,000 students register for this quarter. Okay, we're a small college. We don't have a lot of students. So we've got 1,000 students. So let's say you wanted a sample of 100 students. And what you do is you survey every 100th person who registers at the college. And the college can do that because we know who registered and we know the order at which they registered. That is called systematic sampling. Does that make sense? So I'll give you an example that I used. In fact, I even have it here, I think. It's this one. Where is it? Well, maybe I don't. I had it somewhere. So I actually had a student who became a very big business person who he made hotel towels. And he wanted to sample his towels to see if they did well under stress. So multiple washings, other kind of stress things. He wanted to do stress tests on his towels. So what I had him do, and I consulted for him, what I had him do is I had him literally pick every 1,000th towel off of that assembly line that he was in charge of. And he took those towels, pulled them out, put them in the wash 100 times or so, whatever he needed to do the stress test. And then he looked at those towels and saw if they did well. Does that make sense? And then he had a nice sample, a systematic sample. Any questions on that? So those are the main kinds of sampling that you use for statistics. The worst kind is convenience sampling. And that was my original thing that I showed you, is I showed you that little poll from the Tahoe Daily Tribune, and that's called convenience sampling. Whoever is convenient to pop it in, pops it in, you use that data, and it's meaningless. Okay, so never trust a convenience sample. Okay, especially if there's any reason to believe there's bias, and there usually is. So convenience sampling is not a proper way of sampling when it comes to statistics, because it is prone to lots and lots of bias. Is that clear? Random sampling is the best, but it's the hardest. Simple random sampling means that every group of those 500, say 500 people, is just as likely as any other group of 500 people to be chosen. Whereas just any random sample means any individual is just as likely as any other individual to be chosen. So those are different. So there is, for example, stratified random sampling, where what you do is you stratify to ensure that you have an kind of an equal distribution or a proportionate distribution of ages, but at the same time, you, amongst those ages, or those, say, millennials, you randomize them. And that is done, Gallup uses that. Gallup uses a stratified random sampling technique for most of their studies. So they randomize by telephone call. They have a bias in voluntary response bias, because that's just, it's really hard not to have voluntary response bias. Any questions on that? Colleges usually use cluster sampling. And what are the obvious clusters at colleges? Any thoughts? There's an obvious set of clusters.
Classrooms.
Yeah, classes. Probably classes, not classrooms. Because it doesn't matter that it's this particular room. What it matters is this class going on. Our online class. We're not even a classroom. We're a class, right? There's no room for online class. So colleges typically choose, 10 or 15 classes. Those are the clusters that represent the college. Some night classes, some online classes, some day classes, some transfer classes, some non-transfer classes. And then the good news is there's no voluntary response bias, because if a professor asks the students to do a survey, they always do. It's a cultural thing. Okay, I don't have to force you guys to do it. You're going to do it. Okay, You all did it. I saw the A, B. Do you see all those A's and B's? That's an example where I didn't have voluntary response bias because I made you do it. Do you see that?
That's
And that's classic. Sneaky, right? Sneaky. But it works. And it's not, I don't think it's unethical. But, you know, it works. Any questions on that? Okay, so that's the main thing I want to kind of talk about, kind of the main parts of chapter 1, and also for the project. I want to get you ready for that. On the project, you're going to have to do a sampling technique that's either cluster or stratified. And you're going to have to do it properly. Okay? And you're going to have to identify your population, and then you're going to have to decide how you're going to do your sampling technique based on that. You're also going to have to identify your survey question. One survey question, not 2, but 1. Has to be 1. So I'm going to talk as we go. Next week I'll talk the rest of it about the project. So little bits at a time. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm going to share a different part of the desktop. And refresh. There we go. I think I mentioned this in the webinars. I remember I did. And this is something I wrote. Can I mute you? Yeah, I'll mute you. But unmute yourself if you have a question, though, because I do want to answer questions. Okay, so this is a spreadsheet that I wrote. This is Google Sheets. What I like about Google Sheets is that you can you don't have to pay anything. I'm a believer in making it so price tag isn't the big issue in this class. So you can use Google Sheets. And what you're going to be able to do if you want to use Google Sheets, which I recommend, is the first thing you're going to do after going to the link is you're going to go File, and you're going to write Make a Copy. If you don't do that, you won't be able to do any editing, and you need to edit. And then you're going to type in what you want to call it, and you're going to hit OK. I'm not going to because I don't want another copy of my sheet. But for you, you're going to need to do that, or you can't put numbers in. Any questions on that? And then what you're going to do for this week, by the way, for the next few weeks, actually, we're going to stick with this first tab, is you're going to highlight all the numbers that happen to be there. There'll be different numbers when you look, and hit the backspace. Any questions so far? Okay, so I'm going to do a little survey. And you may have to just guess. I don't really care really what your answers are. I just need some numbers to put in so I can show you how to do all this. So I'm going to ask you a nice question. And it is, how far do you live from where I am right now? I am at Lake Tahoe Community College. And just to guess, just to give you some ideas, I'll do it by road. LA is about 500 miles. Sacramento is 100 miles. San Diego is about maybe 650. Barton Hospital is 3 miles. So I want you to type in the number for your place, and I'm going to start typing them in. So 5, 535, 3, 5, 650, 100, 450, 9, 2. Anyone else? Okay. By the way, this is not a large enough sample. We are going to learn in our class that you need a sample if you're doing data. This is called quantitative data. I don't know what quantitative means, what that word means. You probably heard it before.
It's a number that can be counted. It's like it's not like a person or a subgroup. It's like how tall is this person, like 6'2" or 6'3".
Good. You're good except for one word. It's just a number. Doesn't have to be counted. Okay. So in fact, there's 2 types of quantitative data. One is a number that can be counted, and that's called discrete. And that's like that. The grammar you use is how many. So how many siblings are in your family, right? You can't have 1.37521 siblings. Does that make sense?
Right.
So that's what's called a discrete quantitative variable. Okay. And then there is what's called a continuous quantitative variable. And that means that it can have all the decimals and fractions. So this particular example is continuous quantitative variable because I do not, I live about 0.8 miles from where I'm sitting right here. Maybe I'll even put mine in there just to emphasize that this is a continuous variable. Okay. Unfortunately, it was so depressing, I didn't get to do what I usually do to get here, which is ski to work. So if you live in Tahoe, you know what I'm talking about. It's depressing, isn't it? We have no snow. It's raining now. It sucks. So I know exactly that I live 0.8 miles, about 0.81 actually, because I've done this for 22 years. I've done this walk. So you can live a fractional amount. Does that make sense? And any fraction or any decimal. So that makes it continuous, whereas if it's countable, it's discrete. It can even have a few possible fractions, like how many siblings do you have? Can that be a fraction?
Yes.
Yeah. I have, in my family, 4.5 siblings. How did that happen?
Marriage.
Yeah, marriage of my father, actually. So, yeah, I guess you can call, so that's an in-law. I don't usually call in-laws siblings, but you can, I guess. Then I have a whole lot more. But I'm thinking about Laura, who happens to be my half sister. Does that make sense? But you can't have 3.1652113 sisters. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you can list all the possibilities, then we call it discrete. Is that clear? If it's not quantitative, then it's qualitative. And qualitative is like, what is your favorite color? That's not a number. Nobody says 34. Right? You say blue or pink or whatever you might be. Okay? There's a special kind of qualitative, and that's the yes-no question. And we're going to spend a lot of time on the yes-no question because that's very common for surveys, is you're going to have a yes-no study where there's only 2 outcomes. Okay? Yes, they lived. No, they didn't live. Typical yes-no question. Any questions on that? Okay, so now that we have this data, now we can start analyzing it. So the first thing is, I told you about what statistics as a subject means. That's the analysis of data, collection and analysis of data. But then there's the statistics as what is a statistic, which is different than what is a subject of statistics. I'm sorry if that's confusing, but it's English, sorry. And what a statistic is a number that you get from the data. So a very easy statistic that you should all know is minimum, right? So 0.8 is the minimum. Okay, I live the closest to campus of anyone in this little video. Does that make sense? Okay. Just want to check something. All right, then we have the mean. What's another word for the mean? Kind of a more common word, but the mean is what we use.
The average.
The average. The average. And you've all done this before. I hope you all know what an average is. You add them up, and in this case, divide by 10, because there were 10 answers. Does that make sense? Okay, but it's a whole lot easier to use the spreadsheet than to sit there and try to do it one at a time, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things I tried to make on the spreadsheet, I tried to make it really easy. Do you agree that looked pretty easy? You type in the numbers and you just look?
It's perfect.
Okay. Unfortunately, this needs the internet, so I can't let you do it on the 2 tests. You can use it for everything else, but you can't use it on the tests. You have to use a calculator. Okay, there is the variance, which is not very important, but there is the standard deviation, the sample standard deviation, which is the mean and the standard deviation are the 2 most important statistics in this class. And that might be new to some of you. So the mean gives you an idea of kind of a center of the data. And the standard deviation gives you an idea of how spread out the data is. So what the standard deviation gives you an idea of is how far from the mean is the average data value. Okay? It's not exactly that, but it's close enough for you to understand it that way. There's kind of an ugly formula of the standard deviation, which, as I mentioned on the orientation, you don't have to get into the ugly formulas. But you have to do is trust that I did them right. Are you okay with that? Okay, or trust that the people in Texas did them right. Why did I say the people in Texas?
TI-84.
Yeah, TI and TI stands for Texas.
Yeah.
Those Texans are pretty smart, okay? At least when it comes to calculators, okay? And they've done a good job, and I'll show you that too, by the way. Okay, so we did it right, and but what you have to do is you have to understand what this means. So 261 about, if you round, that's a pretty big spread. That's a lot of miles, isn't it? So we're pretty spread out as a group. Okay, and that's one of the things you can talk about when you're looking at this statistic, is how spread out it is. Any questions on that? So this mean of 175, if you look at the data, nobody lives 176 miles from this campus. In fact, no one lives anywhere close to that. So the mean is not a very good number when it comes to trying to figure out where people live. Does that make sense? But the combination of the mean and the standard deviation tells you a lot more. Because now we know that we can say that most people live within 261 miles of 176 miles. Does that make sense? Okay, you can't live negative miles, so you can say somewhere between 0 and 437 miles. I just added the two numbers. Does that make sense? And that's kind of what the standard deviation gives you. It tells you how far apart everybody is. Any questions on that? Okay, we're going to spend a lot of time on that. Okay, the median, you've probably seen that in middle school. Do you know what it is?
Isn't it the middle number in the list?
Exactly. It's the middle or the average of the middle two if there's an even number. In this case, we have 10 in the list, so it's the average of number 5 and 6. Does that make sense? And it's not, sorry, it's number 5 and 6 when you sort them. So I pointed to 5 and 6, but if you sort them, it's the average of that 5th and 6th. Does that make sense? So that means that there are half the people will live fewer than 7 miles from this campus, and half the people live more than 7 miles from the campus. You'll notice that it's very different in this case than the mean. Right? The mean is 176 miles, the median is 7 miles. So the median gives you an idea that more of a typical person, the mean gives you the average person. It's a little different. Any questions on that statistic? Maximum, you should all know what that is, I hope. Q3. Q3 is, for me personally, Q3 and Q1 are the most frustrating numbers there are. Because there is no math formula for them. It is the most frustrating thing there is for me in all of my teaching. Because I don't like that. If you use Google, if you use this versus using TI, you'll get a different number. Isn't that frustrating? It's like, that shouldn't be true in math, but for some reason no one can figure it out. But if you have a large sample, then they'll be about the same. And what Q3 is the median of the top half. Does that make sense? So we call it the third quartile. So that means there are 75% below that number. Does that make sense? Whereas Q1, which is down here, says that there's 25%, because that's the median of the bottom half. So there's 25% of that number. 25% are below that number. Any questions on that? Okay. Quartiles are important. A lot of times you say, well, if you're in the lower quartile, so for example, if somebody is born in the lower quartile, then they're underweight. And they may need to do some special care for nurses. Does that make sense? I know we have a bunch of nurses in this group, or pre-nurses. So you look at quartiles in nursing in a big way. Quartiles and percentiles. So if you're in the, say if you're in the first percentile in weight as a baby, that baby is probably going to go to the ICU, intensive care unit, because they're going to be so little that there's a big danger that that baby is going to have big health issues. Does that make sense? Whereas if you're in the 99th percentile in weight, what does that tell you? Any thoughts? The mother probably had a C-section because no mother wants to give birth to that kind of thing. Okay. Fortunately, I'm a man. I don't have to worry about it, but women may have to think about that. It can't be, it sounds really painful. Okay, so a 99th percentile baby means that it was huge. Does that make sense? Okay, whereas with a 50th percentile baby, that's the median, and that means your typical baby. Any questions on that? These guys, confidence intervals, that's a different chapter. We'll do that in about 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So we'll get to that another day. The Z-score, that's a really important statistic. What the Z-score tells you is how many standard deviations away from the mean is that value. So what it does is it gives you an idea of how unusual a value is. So if you have a Z-score of, let's do our maximum, 650. And let's type in 650. Notice it says change this. If you use whatever this number is on your project, I will take off points. You need to type in an interesting X and not whatever happened to be on the spreadsheet. Does that make sense? So the interesting one here might be 650 because that's the maximum. And if you type 650 and hit enter, it'll calculate the Z-score, and the Z-score is about 1.8. So what that says is that the maximum is 1.8 standard deviations higher than the mean. So just to give you an idea, have you heard the word outlier before? You heard that word? No?
Yes.
Okay, so those of you who heard it, what is an outlier? What's the idea of an outlier? Because you probably don't know the definition, but what is an idea of the outlier?
It's just a number that's way outside of any, like it's the number that.
Way, I like the word way. I like the word way. That was good. So
Yeah,
it's way far away from the average. Does that make sense? So statisticians like to have a formal definition for the word way. So I didn't expect you to know the formal definition. That's my job, right? And then I expect you to know after today, by the way. So one of the definitions of an outlier is that the Z-score is bigger than 2 or less than -2. Because that means that you're more than 2 standard deviations away from the mean. Do you see that? On either side. If it's negative, that means you're on the low side of the mean, more than 2 standard deviations. If it's positive, you're on the high side. So in particular, 650, I forgot who you are, but you're from San Diego, I know that, my guess. Was that you, Sebastian? Okay, so are you an outlier?
I would say so, yes.
Let's take a look. Your Z-score is 1.8. Remember the definition I just gave? More than 2.
Sorry.
More than 2. So you're not an outlier because your Z-score is 1.8.
So for everything, it's going to be greater than 2.
Yeah. Yeah, greater than 2 or less than -2. Could go on either side. Outliers could be low or high. We call an outlier an extreme outlier if the Z-score is greater than 3 or less than -3. And that's one of those that, oh my God, how did that happen? Does that make sense? That's the extreme outlier. So when you get an extreme outlier, by the way, like for example, for your project, there are a few ways of addressing it. One is maybe you made a mistake or the person lied. Does that make sense? So for example, if you asked, how old were you when you learned how to drive? Let's say that was your study. And the person said 2. How would you treat that value?
An outlier.
But I would treat it a little differently than just an outlier. I would treat that as a data value to throw away.
I say get rid of it.
Get rid of it. Yeah. You get rid of it, and it might have a z-score of, say, 4 or something, right? And you get rid of it because you can't learn to drive when you're 2 years old, right? It just can't happen. So that's one of those you get rid of because you know they just didn't understand your question. Does that make sense? On the other hand, let's say your survey question was, what is your income? And people are all telling the truth. And one person said, I make $1.9 million a year. And you get a z-score of 3.6. You get rid of that?
No.
No, that can that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, it can happen. It's not likely, but it can happen. You don't say the person definitely lied or was like confused. You just say the person's really, really rich. Does that make sense? Sometimes you get rid of the outlier. Sometimes you keep the outlier depending on what you think happened.
Wouldn't you just note it in your data that you're making?
You always note it. One way or another, you always note it. But sometimes you note it and throw it out. Sometimes you note it and keep it.
Okay.
Would you say that's entirely up to your own discretion if it is an outlier or if it isn't?
It's up to your own discretion. It's also up to your purpose, too. So, for example, if your purpose is to find out what tax revenue might be in your town, you don't throw away that $1.8 million because they're paying a lot of taxes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So there are some times when you definitely want to keep that outlier. And then the mean is more important than the median because the mean is very strongly influenced by outliers. And the median is not. So I like to think of the mean is pulling a rope. So in other words, if you're an outlier, you're going to pull that mean. Okay, whether it's on the low side or the high side, and the mean will go that direction. Whereas the median, the outlier doesn't do much pulling. Does that help a little bit? Kind of the idea. The standard deviation is also strongly influenced by outliers. Okay, so those are things to know. Okay, we're going to mostly use the mean and the standard deviation in this class. In an advanced statistics class, you often use the median for reasons I'm not going to get into. Okay, any questions on that? If you have it, I probably won't tell you. Okay, we don't teach advanced statistics at this college, so sorry. I know advanced statistics, but I don't get to teach it because we're a community college. Okay, any questions on that? So in your projects, if you have the number 650 in your project, I'm going to take off points. So you got to pick a number that's a reasonable number. Outliers are reasonable to check for z-scores. Sometimes you're going to check a z-score of something that's really important. Like if you ask how many hours a week do you work, you might want to include 40 and find out the z-score for 40 because that's a standard number of hours people work. Does that make sense? Or if you say how many hours do you sleep, 8 might be a good one because that's the recommended hours. And you can check. And you can check a couple of z-scores and kind of understand, is that unusual or not? Does that make sense? Skewness and kurtosis we don't do in this class. Ignore it. But someone else asked, so I put it in for a different class. So I put it in for them. So ignore a few things. Sorry if there's a couple extras. Percentiles. So we could find out, for example, what is the 95th percentile for the distance that people live from this college? And you just go 95. And that's 598.25 miles. Okay, I tried to make it easy. Do you agree that's pretty easy? Okay, any questions on this? Okay, you can also look at charts. So this is a histogram. You've seen histograms before. I'm not going to spend lots of time explaining all the charts, but I do want you to understand them. So histograms, first thing, the y-axis of a histogram are frequencies. How many people said that? The x-axis are the values that people said. And it's grouped values. So it's between this and that, and then between this one and the next one. This may or may not work for you. Google, it always worked, and then Google changed something. They did some kind of security feature. And for some reason, this works for some people and doesn't work for others. I apologize. I haven't figured it out. I didn't change any of my code, and it stopped working. I was so pissed. But if you go to Boxplot, Authorization required. So I'm going to continue. It says this may be a virus. I don't put viruses on your computer, by the way. So you can trust me. Oh, choose an account. Look at that. See, it may not even work for me now. App isn't verified. Ah. Okay, so it's not working for me. There is a way to make it work, but you have to do that. I might be able to tell you how. But there are box plots and there are stem and leaf plots. So I think I'm not going to be able to get to it. Wow, Google doesn't even let me in anymore. This is new, as like a month ago it worked. Sorry about that. But there are box plots and stem and leaf plots. A box plot is a pictorial way of showing the minimum, the first quartile, the median, the third quartile, and the maximum. And the box goes between the first quartile and the third quartile. That range is called the interquartile range. So interquartile means between first and third quartile. Okay, so it's a depiction of that. It doesn't work well for people who have not taken statistics or people who didn't go through our Common Core system. So if you're 16 years old, you know what a box plot is. Isn't that weird? So you're just at the wrong spot. Okay, but you guys are going to know what box plots are because it's in this chapter. Okay, there's also a stem and leaf, which it probably won't let me do. What a stem and leaf does is it chooses stems and it chooses leaves by digits. So if you look at the histogram, we can't know what the individual data values are for the histogram. The stem and leaf, you can choose the stems, for example, to be hundreds, and it'll tell you how many between 0 and 100, how many between 100 and 200, and then the leaves will tell you what the other digit is, what the next digit is. So you actually get the actual data. The problem with it is it's not as pretty as a histogram. So that's the big problem with it. Any questions on those? Okay, I want to show you one more thing. Now that I've shown you, there's other charts too. There's a pie chart. I'm not talking about it because I think you all have seen pie charts, right? There's a few other charts, but the kind of three big ones for this class would be the histogram, box plot, and stem and leaf. And then the last thing, I got to unshare my desktop and show you how to do this with the calculator. So new share. Okay, so you should see my calculator. Let's do another survey. One more survey, just for fun. Let me ask you, how many months has it been since you took your last math class? By the way, a year is 12 months. So you may have to multiply 12 by a lot. Some of you, it's just going to be 1 if you took a class before. Okay, so you can put in the numbers. 5 is our first number. So I'm going to show you how we're going to put data in. You're going to go to Stat, and then you're going to go to Edit. You're going to go over. You're going to go up to L2, and you're going to hit Clear. Then you're going to hit Enter. There's a video on this, so if I go fast, I understand. You know, I go fast in this stuff because I don't want to go too long. Okay, I just want to give you a big warning. See this DEL button? Never touch it. Got it? You hit DEL when you're on L1, you've destroyed your calculator forever. Isn't that awful? You turn it back on, turn it back off, and L1's gone forever. So don't do that, okay? Unless you come to my office and then I can reprogram it for you. So don't, just keep away from that DEL button. That's one thing these Texans didn't get. They should never have made it that easy to destroy your calculator. Don't you agree? Okay, so once I have that, I can put my numbers in. And let me go to the chat. We had 564. So 5, enter, 60, enter, 4, enter, 24, enter.
Yeah, it's been 40 years for me, so.
Huh? I'll get that. By the way, my arithmetic skills are really quick. 30 months, 168, 28, and 8 times 12 is 96. Okay, and 40 years, I didn't put that in. 40 times 12 is 480.
Wait, we're right. 408. Oh, I've got
Any questions so far? Okay, then we go ahead and I hit the stat button again. I go to the calc button and I go to one var stats. Now this will look different depending on what kind of calculator you have. And this is frustrating for me. Texas, these people in Texas, they're great at some things, they're terrible at others. Halfway through their production of TI-84, they change the way this looks, just to like make it confusing for everyone. So if you have an older version of this calculator, it's gonna look different. And the video I have shows you the older version, so now you're seeing both. So our list is L1. If it doesn't say L1, you go alpha, you go second, 1, and hit enter. Frequency list, clear that out, we don't have one. And then calculate. And there we go. So just some symbols. X bar is the sample mean, which is different than a different symbol than the population mean, by the way. We use the letter mu, which is a Greek letter for population. You'll see that on the other videos. We have SX, that's the sample standard deviation, 151. Okay, big standard deviation, by the way. N is 9, there are 9 people. Min was 4. Q1 is 14.1. Median, med is not Club Med, it's the median, and that's 30. Q3 was 132. The maximum is 480. And that's it. Any questions on that? Okay, to get a z-score, if you're gonna use a calculator, you have to use a formula, which is x minus the mean, calculate that first, and then divide by the standard deviation. So you need parentheses around x minus the mean, or it'll do the order of operations wrong for you. Any questions on using your calculator? Okay, so it's 7 o'clock, and I try to make this a 1-hour video if I can. I don't go over every detail. You're responsible for reading the book. I go over the highlights, and you're also responsible for looking at the long video. That does some more stuff, and hopefully that'll help out. If you have any questions about the homework, about the assignment, post on the Q&A form. Don't email them to me because that's something other people would be interested in. Does that make sense? If you have questions about the project, post on the project discussion forum. Okay? Don't email me because other people will be interested. Unless it is, I'm going to be in Thailand, so do you have any idea of how I'm going to find a proctor? Okay? By the way, that's real. We got a student that's going to be in Thailand at the final exam. So it's interesting, and we're going to make it work. But that's one that the rest of this class doesn't need to like hear the whole conversation. Does that make sense? But if it is, I don't understand the difference between the sample standard deviation and the population standard deviation, that's something you pop into the Q&A form. Does that make sense? Okay, any questions? Oh wait, before we say any questions, let me do one more thing, because this is really important. Oh shoot, let's do this. I'm gonna stop share. I need to go to, wait, and then reshare. Just a second. My computer's really slow. And let me go back and share. Almost forgot. It would have been horrible if I forgot. What did I forget to do? Anyone know?
That word.
The secret word, yeah, otherwise you'd all fail this class. So if I forget, remind me, please. So the secret word is, oh no, computer's like freezing. I'm getting the spinning wheel of death, so I'll get it to you in a second, sorry. I'm sure you've gotten that spinning wheel of death. I'd like to write it down, I may have to just tell you what it is. Here we go, I'm in. Okay.
I'm freaking out.
The secret word is spread. Okay, and I'm using that because what does the standard deviation tell you?
Spread out.
Yeah, how spread out the data is. So the secret word is spread. So I always try and do something that's a theme that you probably aren't going to guess. How many of you would have guessed that as a secret word for this lecture? Probably none of you. So the secret word is spread. There is a secret word quiz. You go to it, you type the word spread. Okay, and then you're counted. If you don't do that, it's ugly for you. You lose 5% for the course grade. Okay, or you write a 5-page paper. So again, you have to do it every week. But it's easy, isn't it? Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to unmute you because this is the time I'm just here to answer questions. If it lets me unmute you. Actually, it's not letting me. I think once you've hit mute, it doesn't let me anymore. Yeah. Questions?
The baby's watching TV, so I'm muting myself.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to remind you, I really want to hear from you guys.
I have a question about the weekly webinars. How far in advance will we know what day and what time you're going to?
What I try to do is like Thursday or Friday morning at the latest.
Okay.
Because what I do is I look at the requests for the week and then try and take the day that has the highest number of requests.
Okay.
But I have to give you a little time to request, but I want to give you enough time so you can prepare. So right now I think we have about 3 or 4 requests. And I think Monday and Tuesday I think is the winning one so far. We'll see what happens the next couple of days. One person won on Wednesday, 2 people won on Tuesday.
And remind me again where we write the requests.
Q&A form.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And every week. Oh, yeah, really cute baby.
Thank you.
I have a question. You talked in orientation about that you're going to go over the exams, the midterm and the exam, the Wednesday before it's due, or?
Yeah, around a week before you have to take it. So usually like a Tuesday or Wednesday before. See what works for you guys too, and what works in my schedule too, but usually that's what I do. And I do that either as a separate webinar or a longer webinar. Does that make sense?
So you should wait until you announce when you're going to do it before you schedule your prom?
No,
If
you
you're
can
going
schedule your proctor today.
Okay.
What I'm announcing, what I'm talking about is helping you study.
Okay.
So what I'm going to be talking about, these are the concepts that you need to study. These are the problems that you should be practicing. Here's how you can practice. Here's some resources. That's what I'm going to be doing a webinar on. The proctor thing, you could go in and schedule that today. And then I might tell you, remind me again about a week before, because I haven't written your test yet. I don't wait till last minute, but I don't usually write your test, 2 months ahead of time.
Thank you.
Okay, but that's a good question. It's a good question. Other questions?
I did, but it was more, I couldn't log on. I think I have to separate about that.
Okay, but you're logged on now, or I'm going to be here.
No, I'm sorry, my chapter 1 and chapter 2.
Oh yeah, and I know that I had another student who was on campus I saw, and I had him log on and he was able to do it. So I know it's something on your side and not. Does that make sense? I'm not sure. I bet try again. Try again. If you want, you can share your desktop and I can walk through it. You want to do that now? That might help others to see what might go wrong.
Okay, it says I can't share.
Right, I have to unshare. So the secret word is spread. So I'm about to drop it. Because I have to stop sharing, because we can't have 2 people sharing at once. So I'm going to stop sharing. And now you should be able, I think you can share now. So there's a screen share. Do you see it?
Yeah.
So click the screen share. Click on the canvas that you're in. Hopefully you're in Canvas.
Yeah.
And then we'll all see it, by the way. So I hope to make sure there's nothing private on your computer, because we're going to see your computer.
My kids.
Okay, so go to modules,
Okay.
and then go to week 1. Scroll down. Go down a little more.
Oh, took the wrong one.
And go click on that one. No authorized session exists.
I tried to do my browser settings and then I was like,
Oh, okay. So this is something I haven't seen before. You might want to try a different browser. What are you using?
Safari. I can use
Do you have Chrome or IE or Firefox?
do Google Chrome right now. It's,
Yeah, try Google Chrome and I bet it'll work for you. If
That's
you
what
copy
I'm
and paste-
on Google Chrome, and I got a Mac too, and that works fine.
it
Yeah,
did?
sorry, it's as far as
Yeah,
Okay,
I don't have a Mac, so I'm not able to test it. So I apologize for that.
that's okay.
So if you go to Chrome, hopefully it'll work. But try that. Because that's what it's saying. It's not liking your browser.
How far in advance are we able to work?
You could work on chapter 13 right now if you wanted to.
Okay, so everything's pretty much available on
Yeah.
Canvas.
I don't recommend going to chapter 13 because you'll be totally lost.
Yeah.
But if you want, yeah, everything. The only thing I don't put way ahead of time are the discussion assignments because that's a weekly discussion.
Okay.
You shouldn't be posting now for 3 weeks from now because other people aren't looking and there's no discussion going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But for those assignments, those should all be set up now. You can do them now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And as for the quizzes too, even though we probably don't know most of the stuff.
Yeah, the quizzes are assignments. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Yeah. And in fact, what I did is I actually changed the syllabus, the word, just about an hour ago to change it to assignments because that was confusing people. So they're assignments. You can start your project today. You definitely should start finding a partner today. And now that I've given you some ideas, you can look at it. You can look at the project description. Now you know some of the statistics for it. So in the orientation, I said, don't start yet. But now we've had the content. Does that make sense? Your project is going to be about doing what I just talked about in this hour. Does that make sense? Okay, and there's full descriptions. Next week, I'm going to go over it. But again, you can look now and even start if you really want to get started. But you have plenty of time. Other questions? Yeah.
So for the research paper, is it 8 pages?
Okay, that's a
Is it-
really good question. I don't have a page limit.
Okay.
Typically, people go between 6 and 10 pages on a good project.
Mhm.
6 is
Okay.
6, you better have a lot of like just everything has to be like there. You know what I mean? No fluff.
Mhm.
10, you probably have some fluff. If you have 2 pages, you're never going to be able to get everything you need in 2 pages.
Is it per person or
No.
group?
Yeah, so your group submits 1 project,
Okay.
and everyone in your group gets the same grade. But what I found is that the person who did most work is probably going to do a lot better in the midterm because you learned. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And everything else, because there's a lot of learning on these projects. I think the projects have the most learning because it's reality. So I don't have a limit. One reason I don't have a limit, I used to be a student, and I know how I was. I just play games and change the margin and the font size. You know what I mean? And I don't want you to play games. I just want you to write the project and kind of do all the things that I asked you to do. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. And if you submit it to me a few days ahead of time, I'll let you know if you missed anything.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Or if you misstated something also. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
there's always something to improve on. Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll say, hey, you have a low A project. I'll give you the A now if you want. And I've had that happen a few times. The person always wants to say, no, I want the high A. And then they come back and spend a couple days and get the high A. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. And then sometimes I look at it and I go, oh my God, you wrote 1 page. And I'll have like a whole long, list of things. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So I'm here to help you. The project is a place where you can make sure you get a good grade. because I'll read your project, I'll work with you on the project. It's not a test. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to write your project though. One thing I won't do. Other questions?
A question about finding articles. I don't know if you said that right at the beginning. Was a little bit late jumping on, but making sure to grab a good article and not just without any, like, are there good sites that you could go to and find that, or, you know?
Right, so a couple suggestions. One, and this is something I said on the orientation, is with a pencil and paper, see if you can reply to your own article. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you can't analyze your own article, then either you're confused and then you should post on the Q&A and I'll help you on that particular information,
Okay.
or it means your article's not very good. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I want to say something else because this happened already. If you post at least a day early by tomorrow, I'll look at it and give you feedback on the article. If you post on Thursday, I won't give you feedback. You still get credit, but if it's not good, I'll take off points. Does that make sense? So I give you some extra benefit for not waiting till the last minute. The other thing, and this happened to somebody, is that if you go to your college that isn't a Cloud Community College,
Okay.
and you go to their library, and you have more access or special access that other people don't have. So one of the posts, I clicked on a link to check, and I couldn't get in.
Yeah, I took that off and I fixed it.
Okay, yeah, I didn't want to give names because
No, you're good. You're
but
good.
I think everyone saw the name anyway. But so that's something to make sure of, is that don't use your college's priority website. But what you can do is if you go to Passport, that's our college's thing, and even if you don't think so, you are an LTCC student because you're taking my class, which means you have access to our college's set of sites. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's always okay. But you should put a note on it saying you need to go to the college's site.
Okay, and that's through Passport.
Right. But your college, none of us have access to your college's stuff.
Yeah. I didn't process that one all the way through.
Yeah, but that's why I check. I check beforehand. So it's good. So you don't lose any points because you did it early enough. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So again, that's one thing. You can also ask questions. Post on the Q&A forum. Hey, does this work? You know, I'm a little confused or something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for this week, hopefully you don't have any problems with the 2 truths, 1 untruth one. That should be pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Make sure you read it and answer the question on your reply. You have to say why statistics is important. But on the other one, make sure that it talks about the sampling technique. So it could be that they just did a convenience sample, but they have to say they did it. Does that make sense? And then someone can reply about it. So that's what I'm going to be looking for, is that it talks about it. It's often at the bottom. There was one post, literally I had to click somewhere, and then I had to click somewhere else from where I had clicked to go find where they talked about it. If it's that hard to find, you need to have instructions on how to navigate to it. Okay, if it's on the article, that's okay. If it's a 100-page article, list the page number they should look at. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So those are some suggestions on helping your fellow classmates. And you want to be nice to them.
Yeah.
I have a question. I noticed that on the truth and untruth, there's some people already telling them which one is the untruth. Are you supposed to do that?
You can. Only if someone has already guessed. You have to do it by Sunday, though. If no one's guessed, don't tell. You know what I mean? And if you see that there's somewhere no one's guessed, guess there. So be nice. Okay? Does that make sense? So I already told you mine, right?
On the
Right.
articles?
I told you one that was truthful, right? Remember the one that is definitely truthful?
The first one.
Yeah, that I was a politician for 9 years. Because that was important, The amazing thing is when I won that election by 3 votes, I was so pissed. Not one of my students voted. Isn't that awful? Now, maybe they hated me and they would have voted against me and I would have lost, so maybe I shouldn't have been pissed. But actually, I had a good class. They were nice. And I would have won by a lot more if they voted. Yeah, so you should vote, by the way, if you can.
On the articles, do you have an age of the year written limit?
I don't have a requirement. It's more interesting if it's somewhat current.
Okay.
But you don't. But I won't take out points if it's from 10 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's fine. Yeah, that's not a problem. Yeah, but it has to be an article. It could be a journal article. That's fine too. You know, like a published professional journal article kind of thing, as long as people can get into it. Okay. Other questions? Other questions? Okay. Remember, my rule is that I'll stay until there's no more questions or there's no people left. So that's my rule. So we can say goodnight and have dinner, or if you have questions, I'm happy to answer questions too.
Have a good night.
Okay. And next week, I'll let you know. Probably on Thursday.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Have a good night.
You too.
Thanks.
Good night.
Night. Thank you.
Okay. Good night. We still got night. We still got Stephanie and Natalie. So if you have questions I can answer, you can also go to leave meeting under the menu.
All right. Good night.
Good night. And Stephanie, any last questions? Give me a minute.
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. Have a good night. And for all of you watching this as a archived webinar on YouTube, please post on the Q&A forum or the project discussion forum for any questions you might have. And have a good night.